It is difficult for many people to believe in ghosts, and this is understandable, for we tend to accept only what we can see and hear with our normal senses. In our day-to-day lives, we're unlikely to come up against paranormal happenings, and yet, from time to time, strange events take place, which seem to verge on fantasy. Often these events happen when we least expect them, and it's not necessary for the traditional bewitching hour of midnight to animate the ghosts, and it's not necessary for the locations to be the hallowed ground of some ancient churchyard or burial place. Ghosts can show up at any time of day or night, often in the most unlikely places, and they can take many forms. Some people just don't believe in them, and this is probably because they've never seen one. They will argue that should a friend see something paranormal, that it was a figment of imagination, existing only in the mind of the beholder, and they'll come up with theories to explain away the phenomena. Perhaps the person seeing a ghost was daydreaming, or perhaps he created the image by self-hypnosis, combined with an over-enthusiastic imagination. The story which follows has been investigated by BBC radio and television presenters, and has been broadcast around the world. It has caused quite a stir wherever it has been heard, and it raises the question, are there such things as earthbound spirits? And do the dead really live on in another state of existence, sometimes trying desperately to draw attention to themselves? Now here is the recording of events exactly as they happened. Situated about 16 miles from King's Lynn in Norfolk, near the East Anglian coast, lies Bircham Newton, the site of a Royal Air Force aerodrome which has survived 2 world wars. It was originally built in 1914, but today it's owned by the Construction Industry Training Board, serving as a base for the many courses they run to train building operatives. It was here, under the most unlikely conditions, that the first psychic event took place. A film crew were at work in what had once been the old officers' mess. They were producing a management training film, a very down-to-earth subject, when quite suddenly one of the heavy studio lamps started to topple over, without anybody touching it. Peter Clark, a member of the film crew, was standing beneath it, but just as it was about to hit him, it swerved to the right, as if pulled by some unseen hand, and then crashed across a table, quite undamaged. There was no apparent reason for this happening, and as it took place during the filming of the scene, everyone in the room was standing motionless at the time. On its own, this accident would have brought forth little comment, but when connected with the events which follow, it takes on a more interesting aspect. Just behind the officers' mess is a squash court, which was built during the First World War, and it was here that another member of the film unit had a terrifying experience. After discovering the existence of the court, he thought he'd like to play a game of squash, and arranged to borrow a bat and a ball from the sports officer, and was loaned the only key to the building. He asked if any of the members of the film unit would like to join him, but as no one was interested, he set off to play on his own. There are 2 courts placed side by side, and at first he amused himself in the left-hand one. Then, for no particular reason, he decided to have a go in the right-hand court, and was soon devoting all his attention to trying to hit the ball. While this was going on, he heard footsteps walk along the viewing gallery behind him, and at first he didn't pay much attention to them, as he imagined that one of the members of the film crew had come to watch him play. And then, suddenly, he realized that he'd locked himself into the building and was completely alone. For a moment, he stood silent, and then he heard a sigh, which made the hairs on his neck prickle, and turning round, he saw a man in RAF uniform staring at him from the gallery. And then the figure vanished. The experience terrified him, and he immediately fled from the building. And the more we probed, the more stories we unearthed. It seemed common knowledge that strange events were continually taking place at Bircham Newton.
We held a séance there with a medium, and he went into trance and produced this dead airman, the voice of a dead airman. It was extraordinary, really, because his face was all sort of twisted up, and he seemed to have difficulty in breathing. Give us your name.
Name.
Give us your name. Give us your name. Can you give us your name?
Wiley.
Wiley?
Now this was quite remarkable, for after a couple of months we contacted a local newspaper, and upon checking the files it turned out there was an airman called Wiley who'd committed suicide on the aerodrome during the last war. Later that night he confided his experience to Peter Clark, who suggested that they should return to the squash court with the film unit's professional tape recorder to try and capture the footsteps on tape. They didn't get the footsteps, but what they did obtain was one of the most amazing psychic recordings ever made.
What was the atmosphere like when you visited this building?
There are two courts, side by side. We first went in the one on the left, which I can only really describe as normal. Then we investigated the rest of the building and searched everywhere to see if there was anybody in there. And then we went in to this one on the right, and the atmosphere was so frightening, so cold in there, that it was just like stepping into another world almost.
Was this the court your colleague saw the ghost of the airman in?
Yes, that's right. This was the one that we'd come to investigate. And we put the tape recorder on the floor and set the tape on it, and we debated whether to stay in the building or not. And we were so frightened that we thought we'd just leave it running and lock it in there and come back when the tape had run out.
Now you're going to hear extracts from that recording. From time to time, the recorder picked up the sounds of muffled speech. This is so remarkable, we've repeated it 3 times. Could it be, then, that we've been privileged to establish contact with the dead? The location of the squash courts could certainly add to this theory, for adjacent to the buildings were the original mess huts, the hospital, and the mortuary.